Well, all right. Welcome to another Rackspace Hangout Deep Dive session where we're going to talk about Azure today. My name is Jeff DeVerter, and I'm the Chief Technologist for all of our Microsoft technologies here at Rackspace. And I am joined by the lovely and talented Kent Kingery coming in from the Mad Lab. Kent, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, why you're here, and what you do for us at Rackspace.
Let's see, why am I here? I'm here because you asked me to be here.
You're so obedient.
Hi, I'm Kent. I am actually the product and engineering manager for our Azure and private cloud offerings inside Rackspace, all things Microsoft. So,
all things Microsoft all day long. Excellent. Well, today, when we were asked to put this together and think through what we would talk about, one of the questions was maybe we can talk about some of the things that our customers are doing. Maybe we can talk about what's going on in the world from an Azure perspective. Maybe we can just talk about what Microsoft is up to at large. Now, everything we're going to talk about today is going to all get back to Azure and how Azure is sort of that glue that pulls it all together, and some of the different and interesting ways that different technologies and different companies are utilizing that. But before we do that, Kent and I have known each other for a good 10, 11 years. And over the course of that time, we have built countless SharePoint environments. We've built cloud servers. We've built all kinds of crazy stuff. And over the time, it's given us the ability to and the opportunity to really get to solve some hard problems and to spend a lot of time with customers. And it's one of my favorite things to do because it ultimately allows you to find out what these things are that they're trying to accomplish. What is their business, and how does technology move that business forward? Now, Kent and I have been really focused in and large, not all the way completely, but in and around the Microsoft footprint for that time. Spending a lot of time in the Linux world as well, as that now becomes a much larger piece of the Microsoft story, strangely enough. But what it's done is it allows us to really get in and hone our skills at talking to customers and helping use technology as a tool towards a business end. Kent, you've done that for people literally all around the world. Maybe just talk a little bit about some of those experiences, a little bit of your history, just so we have some background.
Sure. So my background is obviously, as you know, Jeff, consulting, professional services. I mean, getting in and not so much creating things as much as implementing things. So more of a tool wielder than a tool builder, which is why the opportunity at Rackspace to actually sort of move into the tool building world has been so exciting. And I can tell you that the thing that I find as I think about, gosh, it's been 30 plus years of doing this, starting off all the way back with IBM. But if I look across, all of that time, the common theme that comes through is as you pointed out, most of the customers that I deal with, if not all of them, are looking to solve a business problem.
That's right.
They're not looking to screw a bunch of technology in to say that they have it. I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I've got a rack of all these servers and I'm running this particular version of the OS and I'm doing this, whatever. Really, the question is, what am I doing with it? Am I able to render credit decisions faster? Am I able to keep inventory levels correctly stocked? Am I able to do the kind of research into this particular drug trial that I need to be able to do? And those are all part and parcel of how we set these customers up for success. What do we look at? And what are their requirements? What kind of workloads are they running? So to me, I'm like you, there's nothing more exciting than talking to an actual customer who's taking my pretty pictures and my pretty whiteboard drawings or my not so pretty whiteboard drawings and render those into something that actually makes a difference in people's lives.
Excellent. And so one of the things that I found, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is that it's not always about enabling that customer with the pretty diagram that they go and they implement. A lot of times it's how do you remove a speed bump or how to keep them from being their own speed bump. Most of the times customers will get in their own way. Any examples pop to mind about what customers do, what companies do that actually hurts their progress to utilizing technology as opposed to just being successful with it? How are they hurting themselves?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this just the other day with a customer that I have been talking to, and it is lots of times the desire to be on the new and the pretty and the shiny long before it's ever ready for use. So that can sometimes really be a problem. People really want to gravitate toward the new. They want to gravitate toward this up and coming technology. And the reality is that what they really want and need is to sort of take a step back back, look at what's practical, and move forward. Now, let me also say that, though, that's also a potential speed bump. It can be that they are so used to what they have, right? So I mean, I kid you not, stories abound in my customer sets in the past of customers still running Windows 95 workstations, still running Windows NT 4.0 on a server under Bob's desk down in the dock, and it just works. And look, that's the beauty at some level of Microsoft technology. You get it screwed in, and it does just tend to work. But that can become a speed bump too, because you're tied to that. There's that sunk cost mentality. I've already paid for it. It's already in place, and I'm gonna ride that thing until it just finally keels over dead under Bob's desk down on the dock.
Darn Bob. He's always getting in trouble. Always getting into trouble. So, but you talk about that server down under Bob's desk, and it brings out really the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is security. So the company will sit there in front of you with arms folded and head held high and talk about how they can't move to the cloud, because to do that would expose them to a greater security risk than they already have. When most of the time, the companies that we've talked to, large and small, they don't have any idea what's going on from a security perspective with their technology resources in-house. In some cases, they don't even know that it really is running under Bob's desk down on the loading dock.
Well, and I think that's a great point to make, is that there's a bunch of different kinds of security. There is obviously the security that we all read about and we hear about, which is, oh, people are trying to get into my systems. They're trying to do horrible things to my data. They're trying to retrieve my data and do horrible things with it. But the reality is that there are lots of other security issues. So what happens if that server under Bob's desk actually goes down and they're out of commission for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 days? That's a security issue around not even being able to do business. We don't think of it in those terms, but that could be, for some people, job security. That could be account security. And I will say this, that a few years ago, I think I fell into the trap of worrying about, well, what does the security look like in the public cloud? What should we be concerned about? And falling into that trap of believing that once I put it inside the walls of my business, I've got my perimeter established inside my building, nothing can get in. And then I'm reminded of that old movie War Games, right, where they have the Whopper computer, and it finally becomes obvious that somebody put a phone line to the outside.
Yep.
The minute that you're connected to the outside, you have potential exposure. And don't forget that many of the high profile security breaches that we've seen, data integrity issues that we've seen, have come from systems that are located inside premise. They're not in the public cloud. So, I mean, and I won't name any names, but
I will.
You can go look at the big ones.
Because I want to give it a specific example about it. And even with the best intention and the best investment, everything really has to be considered accessible, regardless. So let's rewind back to the movie The Interview coming out, and there was a certain country that didn't want that movie to come out. And I was reading an article about that recently. The offender had to get through 43 firewalls, 43 barriers that they had to get through to those digital properties that they ultimately got to. And so it brings out the point, and I think that we should probably actually start to talk about Microsoft in some context here. The stance that Microsoft takes around security, and I want to take it more from a large level, and then we're going to get into what they're offering today. And that is, they take a stance that they're already in. That they're not necessarily just trying to keep them out, but they also accept the fact that they're in. So now, how do you start to pay attention to things in a way that you can start to see abnormalities? And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so look, I'm far from being a security guru, but I think that is a great point to make, that if you proceed with the idea that you're not going to keep them out and move to the idea that you're trying to minimize or simply eliminate what they can do once they're in, I think you're in a much better position. And I think a lot of it has to do with, how do we monitor our landscape? What is the capability that we have to be able to see it? What's the pattern recognition capability? How often do we see a certain activity on a certain set of files? And this is what I'll make a plug for us at this point. When I listen to our managed security guys talk, man, they just impress the living daylights out of me, because they clearly, I'm glad they're on our side, because clearly they have thought through all of the possible things that could go wrong, and have come up with ways and means to sort of defend against that. And I think in the Microsoft space, it's obvious that Microsoft, look, they used to be the poster child for being the most open and the most abused system. I remember the days, right, when IIS was, you stood IIS up and it was an invitation to every thief, crook, whatever, to get into your system.
Right.
But nowadays, that is not the case, and they have spent a huge amount of resource and a huge amount of investment in research and testing, et cetera, to build these kind of capabilities, not only in their premise systems, the things we're all used to, but in the public cloud.
Yeah, and so as you track back, and I've been following some of these the tech fellows inside and heavy duty researchers inside of Microsoft, and the stance that they took, call it 10 years ago, was really focused primarily around, they set up a bunch of honeypots, and these were servers, these were environments that were out there, patched and unpatched alike, that they would just watch. They would just open them up and say, come on and get them. And they would look for those patterns of people coming in. And so their stance at that point was, I want to know what it looks like when somebody's trying to come through.
Right.
Now what you find is, with that mindset of, now with these great big walls they put up based on those threat dynamics and the way they expect those actors to behave, that now they are looking at managing and monitoring the work that's going on inside and the activities that are happening inside of the data center wall. And it allows them to then start using tools that they built to do other things to monitor this. So now they take outputs of all of those activities and throw them into a big data set. And that big data set becomes a big IoT environment, because every one of those devices and every one of their data centers around the world, 19, 20, 21 to date, I forget the exact number, become hundreds of thousands and millions of endpoints of activity that is, well, I think I'll call it the definition of Internet of Things. It's just, we're monitoring those things for behaving differently today than they did yesterday, and what's going on with that.
And at scale, you're able to draw pattern recognition, I think, a lot more fine-grained, right? So when you're dealing with one, system or one premise environment, you may see a certain number of attacks or a certain number of security type activities. But as you said, now multiply that out by thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of customers in multiple data centers all over the world. And all of a sudden, that data stream, that ability to look at what's happening and being able to analyze it, and then being able to come up with remediations against it, is much nicer, much richer in terms of what you can get. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I think moving to the public cloud, there's a lot of advantages there just in that alone, is that now you're not dealing with just your environment. You're actually in a place where hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of other customers are, and there's lots of focus on that.
That's right. And that brings out to some announcements that Microsoft has had recently in the security space, and that is around their advanced threat detection capabilities, which is really a suite of tools that they put on top of. Again, we'll go back through the evolution of, let's look what the patterns look like when someone's trying to come in. Let's look at the patterns of our customers on a day-to-day basis and look for changes. And now let's take that data set, that suite of data, and now apply some BI on top of it. Let's apply some knowledge. Let's apply some very specific dashboards even. So Microsoft came out with this advanced threat detection. Now, what's kind of cool about that is, not only is it advanced threat detection around activities that you may deploy into any of the Azure suites, but it's also applied to the tools and technologies that they have deployed inside of Azure. For instance, Office 365. So now you can get this capability looking at your data set that maybe is your email treasure trove of IP. Maybe it's against your SharePoint or against what's going on in Skype for Business and the way it's behaving. So have you dug into that much, Kent, around their security stuff? Their advanced
I have. I've looked at it specifically to be able to understand how what they have is different or similar to our own offerings, right? And how we, might leverage the offerings that we currently have and include their capabilities. Because look, the reality is that the more the merrier, right? The more capability, the more tools that we have, the more data, the more visibility we have, the better off we're going to be. And I think it's interesting, you bring up a good point, sorry not to cut you off, but it's interesting that a lot of the concern in the public cloud is not only from how do I protect from people coming outside the cloud, but it's also how do I protect myself from my neighbor sitting in the next rack, or even sitting in the same, sort of shared space that I'm in. You hear customers bring that up a lot. And so when you look at this advanced I can't even say it. They don't want me to market it for sure. Advanced threat detection offering. A lot of that is not only to protect from the outside, but also to say, hey, look, we understand that there is concern about your neighbors, about the guy down the row from you, or in another connected data center. And so there's a nod to that, and there's actually an address point for that. So
there is, and really what it also does then is it also starts to show, where does a company like Rackspace fit into the story? So Microsoft has created all this amazing pattern recognition, tooling, data sets, and BI on top of it, and then something is recognized. There's an issue. Somebody's they're doing something nefarious. At Microsoft, or other companies of their ilk, they're going to then say, here's the problem. You should probably do something about that.
Right.
When you're working, we recommend
that you
get a guy.
Yeah,
we'd like to be that guy, that girl. So really, it's at Rackspace. It's around providing that extra, or not extra. It's about providing that expertise around getting in and fixing these issues. Whether that is tearing down an environment and rebuilding it, whether it is securing a data set and getting it offline so that's secure, whether it's just helping you through the problem. That's what Fanatical Support, where we really start to apply it.
Well, and look at the kind of people that we're bringing in, right? I mean, we're bringing in people who have spent, their entire careers with the NSA or with the military, and this is what they do, right? I mean, and this is, again, you talk about a speed bump. You look at security in most organizations, very few companies have the ability to go higher at the depth and the breadth of the talent that they need in the security space. Look, most of them are trying to still keep the lights turned on from an application perspective, much less security. And so what we've done is we've taken that and we've built around that. And that's where I think, again, the Microsoft tooling is so attractive, is that we have now access to a set of tools, but we also have access to the minds that know how to use those tools, the managed piece of that service. So
it doesn't hurt when Cyber Command is just down the road.
Yeah, doesn't at all.
So, we seem to be, as we talk about cloud, we're coming back to these data sets, we're coming back to Internet of Things, and now I'm going to change topics just slightly and talk about one of your favorite things, and that's the announcement of yesterday around Raspberry Pi 3.
The Raspberry Pi.
First thoughts, first impressions around what they're talking about?
I'm excited about the fact that they have finally figured out that they need to put a lot of this networking capability, especially the wireless and the Bluetooth, on board the board. Now, look, I get why they didn't do it. There was actually somewhere in one of the interviews, one of the inventors, one of the designers said, hey, we moved LEDs off the edge of the board in order to make room. Why we didn't do that before, I don't know. But look, I'm a huge Raspberry Pi fan. Hang on one second.
All right.
So here is my Raspberry Pi cluster, right? These are all Raspberry Pi 2s. And basically what I use this for, you're talking about Internet of Things, I actually have a sort of a simulator around being able to take things from the various sensors and so forth. Look, I used to work in the traffic management, area, right? Measuring cars going across roads. That's a classic Internet of Things example. And I can see where these kinds of devices are now going to circumvent or even supplant the multi-$1,000 devices that they used to bury in the streets, right? So I'm hugely excited about this. I just think it's one more step down on these cheap ones to go along with, remember, the what they call the little one, the Nano, the little micro version, a little $5 version. They were actually putting that in a bag on the front of a magazine, right? So buy a magazine, get a computer.
Get a computer. Welcome to
right?
2016.
Yeah. And so I think if you look at Microsoft's Internet of Things, look at their strategy, not just their technology, because the technology is stunning, but their strategy is to be able to couple this ability to have, very, very cheap and reliable storage, right? So you can send all your data there from your IoT network, but then on top of that, be able to couple that with the machine learning, with the big data analytics, all of that. It's a complete discussion. It isn't just about the ingesting of data.
Well, and it also kind of speaks a lot to, I'll call it the new Microsoft, under their new leadership. We see a completely different posture from this stuffy, enterprise, buy my shrink wrap software, or I'll throw a chair at you, and to an environment where you have an announcement on Monday that is for or when whatever it was last week for the Raspberry Pi 3, and the day after that announcement, Microsoft says, by the way, in talks to have Windows 10 shipped on it, Windows 10 IoT. At this point, they know the IoT version of Windows 10 will go with it, and what they're trying to figure out is, at this point, is will the full Windows 10 even deploy with it? I mean, we may not have our hoverboards here in 2016, but at least we have computers on the front of magazines.
Well, that's true. Although when I look around Rackspace, sometimes I do see those hoverboards, flying through the hallways. So
they're not wheels. There's wheels. There's wheels.
They're wheels. So I will say this: that speaking of the Windows on the Raspberry Pi, so two of those devices that I just showed you in my sort of cluster there are actually running Windows 10 IoT version, and they're able to actually have little .NET applications that are simulating data coming off from sensors, and so it's a very compelling story. You mentioned it's the new Microsoft. So look, you and I are old enough to remember Microsoft from way, in my case, way back.
You still had hair.
And I still had hair. I did. I actually did, and not nearly as many wrinkles. But what was interesting is to watch the turning points as each successive leader's taken over. So the era of Ballmer, we all still remember the developers thing, and that was a great time to move the company forward. Mm-hmm. But I still remember, even just right prior to joining Rackspace last year, seeing a picture of Satya on stage with a big banner screen behind him that said, "Microsoft loves Linux." And I turned to a friend of mine and I said, hell has frozen over now.
That's right. Go get a little rock salt and go sprinkle it.
Absolutely.
That's right. So it's at Rackspace, we have the opportunity in talking to customers from the smallest of the small to the biggest of the big. And so when we think about Internet of Things, I got to be honest with you, it took me a little while to figure out what Internet of Things was. And I think I understand now. But there may be a couple of people in the world who don't quite understand it yet. So let's talk about a couple of tangible examples. You've mentioned one, and that is traffic management. Traffic management starts with traffic monitoring. Who's going where and what are they doing? I'm going to give you an example later on around what one Microsoft researcher did just with some open technologies to help traffic management at Heathrow Airport. But let's talk about some examples of Internet of Things. How can these little $30 or $5 devices, or 1,000 of them, or 10,000, or 1,000,000 of them, what value do they bring? What's going on?
So I think I'll give you two examples from my recent history. Let's talk a little bit deeper about the traffic monitoring. So, growing up, I mean, most of us are used to having seen those places in the road where they've cut a, sort of an oval and they've laid in an induction loop of wire, and they basically tell when the car is going through the induction loop, and that's a measurement, right? So that's a very crude measurement of motion. The way that we get speeds, so if you go look at Waze, or if you look at Google Traffic, or if you look at some of the stuff I've built in the past, the way they get speed is they measure movement between two different points. Yes. Now, sometimes that's easy to do on an isolated road where there's few cars moving along. It's easy to do. But now we've expanded the kinds of devices that we can use. We can use front-firing radar. We can use ground sort of sensing that can actually tell what model of vehicle it is, and to some degree how many people are in the vehicle. So then being able to do long-range Bluetooth scanning. So as you're driving along with your mobile phone, I pick your Bluetooth MAC address up, and a mile down the road I pick it up again, and I sense that distance. All of those sensors are generating just petabytes of data, right? So in a particular state, in state of New Jersey, for example, there's just petabytes of data being generated out of these things. And what do you do with that data once you have it? What you'd like to be able to do is you'd like to be able to do predictive analytics. You'd like to be able to say that on a Tuesday, when the weather is a certain type, I know that my congestion is like this. Or around the Meadowlands, when there's a game going on Sunday between 2 and 5, the traffic patterns look like this. Now, why is it important? It's important from a traffic management perspective, but what if you're an advertiser? What if you have digital outdoor advertising that's around the Meadowlands, and you say to yourself, hey, I would like to know what those traffic patterns look like, and I'd like to know what kind of cars. Is it mostly Mercedes? Is it old beat-up pickups? What is it running? And I can actually change my advertising based on the pattern. That only comes from being able to crunch all that data and be able to ingest all that data in the first place. That's a great example there. And when you tell people that, it's kind of like me. I mean, I'm just like on the edge of my seat, because this is cool stuff. Another example, just in similar things, would be the oil and gas fields that are sending out data from pumps. So similar kind of thing. What do my pump production look like? What's my efficiency look like? How can I crunch all that data?
Radio that data back and then get it all collected in a single location. That's right. Could be on, here, another great example is a data collector on semis as they move goods all around the country. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these devices moving around, and individual trucking companies want to know, 1, where are they? 2, why are they still there? 3, when are they going to get where they're supposed to be? 4, how much gas is getting consumed? What are the traffic patterns between there? Is that going to slow down? Am I going to lose, a whole truck full of produce along the way because there's an accident 5-10 miles up ahead?
How long has that truck been on the road? When is it time for maintenance? How soon will I have to change out, certain parts in the truck? Absolutely. It's interesting. Way back when we were talking about RFID, that was the big thing 10 years ago, right? Everything has an RFID chip. That was pretty much a dumb type of thing in the sense that it only gave you the information that there was a thing and it was coming through a certain sensor. Now, all of a sudden, we've taken that and we've turned it into the smart thing that can actually emit all sorts of data all the time. And again, we're not talking about a few bytes of data here and there. We're talking about petabytes of data, multi-petabytes of data.
That's right. That's right. Even tons more examples. We deal with some large manufacturers of farming equipment, and those things are basically just computers on tractor wheels these days. You don't even need a Pearson in there for when they take publicity pictures. Right. It's pretty impressive what they can actually do. So as all this data gets stored out and Azure's a great location for this, from a storage perspective, for application perspective, from a choice and type of storage that it goes into, amazing location. But sometimes you have to do something with that data. Now, Microsoft announced about a month ago the evolution of Azure Pack. We are now staring a technical evaluation of Azure Stack in the face. They've updated it once. And that allows basically to have the same code base running in a private cloud environment, your own dedicated hardware that would be the same code base that runs out inside of Azure. Now, you don't get all the features and capabilities that you would outside of Azure. That's the test bed, and production runs maybe necessarily over in private cloud. But when we think about that scenario, we've got all these collectors all over the world, and let's say we're collecting trucking information by a multinational company. So it's coming in from everywhere. So Azure becomes a great place to have these receivers for this data coming in and being collected. Now, all that data's got to get funneled into something at some point and put in a useful fashion. A lot of companies will take that data and they'll bring the working subset of that down then into a big database that is on-prem, that allows them to throw as much hardware to get the most amount of data out of it quickly or secure. They've got their own reasons. But Azure Stack, you started to play with this, Kent.
Yeah, but I want to touch on
there too.
Yeah, I want to touch on something before we move forward. So you made the comment you want to be able to throw a bunch of hardware at it, but what if? And the reality is you're never going to have as much hardware on your premise as you actually want. Right. So what if the reality is you're really collecting this data and maybe once a week or twice a month or once a month? That's when you really want to crunch it. You really want to distill it, and you want to turn it into operational information. Why not just send all that stuff to Azure during the time period you're collecting data? You continue to ingest it, and then when you're ready to process it, you literally go out, you spin up an HD Insights or a data lake environment, you run that for whatever time you need to run it, you get your results back, you store the results, you shut the instance down of HD Insights, and then you bring that data back. All of a sudden now your processing, your batch capability is now up in the cloud, and you're not having to continually add racks of servers to do that on your premise.
So a very compelling story. Let's go down the rabbit hole just a step farther. Let's say that you need to do this in earnest once a month. That's the real crunch time of what you need your data for. And because it's a month, it doesn't mean I have to have it at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, or maybe. And so that allows you to then say, hey, my computational subset means based on the size that I can grow this to, it's going to take me 7.5 hours to run this thing, so long as I can get 5,000 servers at my disposal. Now I can come knocking on my cloud provider of choice and say, I'd like to keep this number down. When is your downtime? Why don't you go back and look at your Internet of Things as it relates to when you're actually consuming your own cloud or your customers are, and give me a window where you have some flexibility that will allow me to then go in and consume that at a price that's more advantageous to me.
Interesting point. How far away do you think we are from seeing that ability? Because right now it doesn't exist in Azure. I pay the same price for a VM running at a certain time as I do another time. But how far away are we for the capacity? Just like airlines do with tickets. Right. I've got an extra seat. I want to fill it up, and I'm willing to sell it to you at half because I don't want to fly the plane with an empty seat. Mm-hmm. Same as I don't want to have a server out here running at less than full capacity. So, man, that's exciting stuff.
Personal opinion, I think that the two clouds that are neck and neck here, Azure and AWS, have to get a little closer from a capability perspective and an interoperability perspective, because at that point, then you have true competition at the instantaneous compute conversation, and now you can go in and start to have those conversations because it's a value to them at that point. Because otherwise, it's the same story as how do I get better advertising around the Meadowlands at between 2 and 5 on a Sunday when the game is on.
Right.
All right. Where was I going with that? What were we talking about?
I don't know. See, we're both getting old.
We are getting old, and there's just too much to talk about. Oh, private cloud. So then why does private cloud matter, Kent? Why are they spending all this effort?
So I think private cloud matters for a couple of reasons. One is when you really do have a need to have specific on-premise capability. Let's say that you have hardware devices that you actually use that need to be connected to your systems, and you can't just go run down the road to the Azure data center in San Antonio and sort of hook that up. Microsoft kind of frowns on you going in, without them knowing about it, sort of thing, just a little. So there's that scenario. And then the other scenario is we're sort of back to our sort of sunk cost environment, right? I've already got a platform. I've got a set of servers that I'm using, and maybe they're just not being utilized efficiently and effectively. Yeah. Now, one could argue, I know there's always going to be cases that can be made too for things like data sovereignty. I need to be able to control where the data is, or, really, really high security environments where you don't have the compliance certification at Azure that you need. Maybe you need a level of, PII or something like that, or PCI compliance that you don't get out of Azure. That's a regulatory thing. It's a law thing. Nobody wants to break the law, and nobody's suggesting that you do, but that's an obvious place where the hardware on site. And it's that hybrid capability that I think that's where you're going is the ability for me to have part of that in the public cloud, part of it in the private cloud, connect the two together and be able to manage the workloads. Now, you talk about the speed bumps. Here's a speed bump. Knowledge about how to do that and how to do it effectively.
It was hard to build Azure Hack, let alone Azure Stack.
Correct. Yeah, and I can tell you the Azure Stack thing is exciting. I remember you and I sat in a room with a whiteboard and started to draw out, what this could mean for our customers for sure. And all of a sudden what it does is it makes sometimes the word homogeneous is actually a negative, but for us it's positive. It sort of homogenizes the environment so that now our support people, our architects, our security guys are looking at roughly the same platform, whether it's sitting in the customer's premise, whether it's sitting in our data centers, or it's sitting in Azure. We're seeing the same things, the same types of capability.
It's one pane of glass to rule them all.
Yes.
And it really is a strategic differentiator. You have AWS who makes the play that if it doesn't fit in the cloud, it doesn't fit anywhere. It shouldn't be anywhere. As opposed to Microsoft that is saying, we're going to acknowledge that though we think we have the best the world's best public cloud, that there still is a place for the private cloud. And we're going to make it as easy as possible for you to consume both of those.
Well, and not only easy, but we're going to make it feature rich and feature equivalent where we can. Because right now, if you take a look at private cloud, it's very powerful, right? You've got virtualization, you've got service bus, you have database as a service, you've got websites, but you don't have all of the other features that are sitting in the Azure environment. And look, Microsoft's been very clear, set shows up in the public cloud first and eventually makes its way down to the private cloud. Yeah. But knowing Microsoft and seeing their history, it does eventually make its way down to the private cloud.
Well, I think what we're also seeing is we're seeing a similar pattern to what we saw in the SharePoint space, and that was this big monolithic nasty thing of SharePoint as it was in 2007. And of course, every feature comes out, it gets bigger and nastier. But in 10, you started to see these capabilities of features, and what features were basically the core functional elements that made up SharePoint, and then additional capabilities were able to be installed and added to it. Now, when Stack came out, Azure Stack came out a month ago, it was bare bones. It was compute, it was service bus, it was a few other things, some networking pieces. And not 2 weeks later, they had sites for it. They had the developer tools for it, and then ultimately, what that was showing a similar example where here's your foundation, here's your framework. Now features can be added into this, which really gives us some hope for the future that as you see the latest and greatest get added to Azure, that it really is just a bundling and a deployment then for it to ultimately show up in Stack.
Well, I don't want us to gloss over the point that you made, right, about having the choice, right, of where you want to put things. In fact, I think that my sort of mantra has been, Microsoft Cloud Technology, Rackspace expertise, any data center in the world that we can get access to. And so we're currently doing that, right? We have private cloud on customer premise. We have private cloud in our data center. We have Azure, and we're able to offer that support offering because, look, for us, it is really about serving the customer's needs, and that's what Microsoft's about. Look, we know you're going to want to do this in places other than our data centers, and so we need to give you the ability to have the same feature experience, the same operating experience in each of those places.
And what it's unlocking is crazy exciting, because now instead of making this decision, okay, my app, it's either going to run in my data center or it's going to run somewhere else. And so it's a very binary decision. Now that somewhere else could be a Rackspace, but it still behaves a lot like my data center, or in an Azure. And that's a very binary type decision. In fact, if you rewind things even a little farther back in time, what you find is people trying to make these big binary decisions. We're either an on-prem company or we're a off-prem company. And I'll just say off-prem because it could mean a few different things.
Right.
And now that's down to the point of, hey, my app could either go here or it could go there. Now we're slicing and dicing the app apart. And we're saying the data can go here, the compute can go here, and the web front end or the endpoints of this thing could go out in that location. And it's, my new favorite phrase, and that is, in this digital world, no decisions are binary anymore.
Well, and it could go not just either or, it could be both, right? So at some point I'm rocking along and I'm doing my internal on-prem work, and I've decided for whatever reason that I really want to continue to maintain that investment. I'm doing things on-prem, but all of a sudden now I have the ability to say, oh, when I need more capacity or I need to fail over, I can fail over into an identical environment somewhere else, whether that be in Rackspace's data center, whether that be in Microsoft's data center. Excuse me. And it is that ability to be able to have that choice. Look, I foresee a point at which we're going to get to where when we deploy an application, we as operations people are no longer going to even make the decision, where does it go? You're going to have the master cylinder in there. Remember the old Felix the Cat days, the master cylinder. Master cylinder is going to be in there saying, okay, well, I'm going to make a few decisions. Is it cheaper for me to run it on my premise, or is it cheaper for me to run it in Azure? Do I have capacity in my premise, or do I have excess capacity in the Rackspace data center? And it starts to move that stuff around, just like we're moving around virtual machines today, right, in a virtualized environment to take advantage of the resources. Now we're talking about doing that with workloads.
Well, and if we rewind to the beginning part of this or mid part of this conversation, then it's around, time of day, time of week, day of the week. Where can I get the cheapest compute? Where can I get the cheapest storage? Ship it.
Absolutely.
Off it goes.
Because look, that's a model that already makes sense today, right? I mean, look, utility companies are offering you the ability to sign up for cheaper rates if you're willing to let them turn off your electricity at times, rolling, turn your heat up, turn your heat down, whatever it happens to be. The same thing should be true of things that are inherently digital, right? I mean, that doesn't even require any wiring per se, except at the software level. So, and I think demand is what's going to drive that. Demand, the continual pressure to drive cost to serve down. I mean, frankly, look, we're at such a low level cost to serve at this point. I mean, when I look back 20 years ago, or certainly 30 years ago when I started my career, I still remember standing on the loading dock of a bank at 3 in the morning unloading a $70 million mainframe. That's not the drives, that's not the terminals, that's the mainframe, $70 million. And now you look at Moore's Law and all of the things that have caused that cost to just continue to come down. But there's still more that can be eked out by efficiency of operations. So.
Absolutely. And so from an efficiency of operations, you start to think about, how do we expand a network? How do we make things bigger? Because, where did I put it? Put it down here. I have my very sad Windows phone. And I call it a sad Windows phone because
it doesn't look all that sad from here, but trust me, folks, in person, it is incredibly sad.
But it has a bright green background, which is super exciting. But there's not a lot that I can run on it. Now, let's talk about Microsoft's acquisition this week of Xamarin. So Xamarin, a pretty sweet tool set capability where developing in C# allows you to compile to output to the two environments that exist everywhere. You got your Azure, or you got your iOS and you got your Android, but maybe even start to get some applications for me on my Windows phone.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I don't. I guess I got to say, I'm not surprised. I don't know who was surprised to see this coming. I mean, certainly the relationship between Microsoft and Xamarin has been very, very close, from the beginning.
That's right.
And I think that when you talk to developers, there's a whole huge community of developers that were incredibly frustrated in not being able to develop for the iPhone, right? I mean, they're .NET developers or C#, but where is my C# for Xcode? Where is my capability to use Visual Basic, right, to be able to build an iPhone app? And so this capability is all of a sudden, it's not so much even about making more apps. That's not the direct piece of it. It is about enabling more application developers, so that now the ideas that couldn't currently be put out there are now able to be put out there with a framework that allows you to be common across all these. I mean, it's some neat stuff. So.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll start to see some apps. But ultimately what it'll do is that data, especially for families or people with multiple devices, that data's got to be stored in a common location. Hello, Azure. Another endpoint, either throwing computer or at least data and state of applications out into a storage location like Azure.
You bet.
All right. I want to talk about something I read about this week, and it was really kind of cool. And so what a Microsoft researcher did is he thought it'd be kind of cool to look at the efficiency of a couple of different airports in England. And
I'm sorry, are there efficient airports in England?
No, that's why he started looking at it. Because
I've not flown into any, so sorry.
So the main one was Heathrow, of course, and so one from an efficiency of taxiing. And then the second piece, not just from a taxiing perspective, but from pollution perspective, because you had a lot of these big planes just sitting around doing nothing, waiting for things to happen. So what he did was he used a couple of tools. He used this app. Have you ever used Flight Radar 24?
I have seen it. I've never used it myself, but I know what you're talking about.
So in reading about this, I've never heard of it. So I go to look at what is Flight Tracker 24. You can watch every flight in the world, wherever it is. And you click on it, it shows its track. I freely admit to spending a lunch hour watching planes while I ate my sandwich.
That's plane spotting, right, as opposed to train spotting.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. All right.
And so he took that, and then he took OpenStreetMap. You're familiar with OpenStreetMap?
Absolutely.
It's an open source way that's got every road mapped in the world. You can get out there and go drive and send your collection back and tag it and all that sort of stuff. So he took a combination of those two things, overlaid them together, and looked at where these planes were sitting, and came up with this algorithm, came up with this set of data that needed to be computed. And then for the ultimate output then would be, if you would route your planes in this way, at these times, and at these speeds and a few other variables, that it would be a better experience, better for the planes, better for the people, better for the air around the airport. And so he had to put that out to be computed. He sent it out to Azure to be computed. Now it took, I thought I wrote it down. Nope, because it was mapping the taxiing of airplanes. So he modeled a new way to do it. It took weeks to be computed in some HPC environments, but ultimately came out with an output that did actually have that response. And I think that this is an excellent example of how Azure can be consumed in a way that this researcher didn't have to go buy scores and scores of machines, but actually just use Azure to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned the scores and scores of machines, because I'll have to find the link for you at some point. But on the very, very far end of the scale, the other end of the scale, I just read a thing not too long ago of people who were doing ping pong score analysis, for a ping pong tournament, and it was the same kind of thing, right? It's certainly nothing on the scale of what you're talking about, but the ability to ingest all that data and be able to come up with, again, some predictive analytics around ping pong, time of day, temperature in the building, type of player, all those kind of things. And so it's not just these gigantic problems and people with gigantic budgets, but it's like the common Joe on the street can go now and avail himself of the resources necessary to do that. The other thing that story points out, though, is I think this is a very, very under trumpeted, undersung, whatever you want to call it, a bit of Microsoft, and that's Microsoft Research. Microsoft spends a ton of dough and has a ton of folks. At one time, I think I read somewhere that they were the single biggest hirer of outcoming technical PhDs coming out of the university system in the US. And if you take a look at the kinds of things that are coming out, well, look, the Xbox Connect, I believe, was a Microsoft research project in motion capture and all that sort of thing. So the fact that, we talked about it earlier, Microsoft is not just about Windows, right? I mean, certainly that's a great part of their legacy.
Yeah.
That's definitely not what they only are today. So.
Right. And, I think even to get all of the resources that he needed to do that, it wasn't any money out of his pocket. He just put in a research request, and it was approved by Microsoft to be able to do that. So because we hear about cloud is big and amorphous, and my wife attempts to explain to her friends what I do, and I don't talk about cloud, and it doesn't go well. And
no, he's not a weatherman. That's not what.
No, but then when I start to even explain IoT, I get stumped up. And these types of examples, I think, are huge to understand. What is the value of cloud? What is the impact it's having on everyone's day-to-day life, let alone the efficiency and economies of multinational or even local companies? It's very strategic, very, very tangible impact. And that's one of the things that I'm just crazy excited to be a part of Rackspace, and that is our ability to help customers work with that technology to have an amazing outcome.
Well, remember, and I tell this story all the time, remember when you and I sat down last year and the first thing you said to me was, hey, Rackspace is going to provide managed service capabilities on top of third-party public clouds. And I looked you in the eye because I was trying to figure out, what did they put in your pancakes the morning that we had breakfast? And here we are right now doing it for real. Then Rackspace is doing it not just on one, but on two different third-party public clouds. And so as more and more of our customers gravitate toward the public cloud, as more and more of our customers get over the fear, the trepidation, the reluctance to move there, and we actually have some customers who are coming to us saying, look, this data center zero thing, I believe in it and I want to accomplish it. Rackspace, tell me how I get there. What does it look like to make that journey? Man, you're right. It is an exciting time to be part of the industry specifically, or generally, but Rackspace specifically. So.
It's a brave new world. This last year, I really saw a complete turning point. I've been with Rackspace almost 8 years now, and there was always a lot of you had to talk people out of their data centers. Now they're just giving their data away. Not giving it away. I mean, they trust it now. They've heard the message enough. They know that companies like Rackspace, like Microsoft, that they know how to keep the data safe. They know what they're doing. I think
that's the history. That's the history of who we are, though, right? You go back to the legacy of the various early days. I was a very, very early customer of Rackspace. I was doing consulting, had my own company. I had customers that wanted to host, and I was a very, very early, a sort of adopter of that, thinking somebody else can do this. I don't want to stand up servers. I don't want to run that. I want to let somebody else. And so that history, that legacy of how do we do it right? The security thing's a great example, right? That's just the natural progression of our capabilities. So.
Yeah. So as I make my next point, though, I want to make one real quick statement, and that is I want to take some time to answer any questions or comments you guys may have that are watching. All of 21 of you, we're excited you're here. You're awesome. Just use the Google Plus app. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure it's in there. Just use the Google Plus app. Ask us a question, and Alan will make sure that we can see it on the screen, and we'll talk about it and talk about how intelligent that question is. But as you think about companies moving out, it's in Rackspace's history, it's a lot of cases we were helping them pick up these workloads or workloads they were inventing and move them over and support them here. We were migrating them and then running them for them so that they didn't have to, helping them architect for the future and for those big Super Bowl moments when they needed their app to be online and ready to take orders. But with the cloud, Azure, we're in a brave new world of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, database as a service, everything as a service. And applications are getting engineered and architected today in so many different ways to be able to actually make use of the promises of the cloud. That's one of the things we're crazy excited about as well, and that is to be able to help customers, not just through the migration journey, but through the transformation journey.
Well, I think if you look at where our professional services organization has come from and where they're headed and the sorts of talent that we're starting to attract there, you are starting to see that capability in spades, right? You're starting to see more and more organizations looking to us for guidance. In fact, I made this comment in a meeting just recently. When I talk to customers, what I hear the common theme is help, right? Help me. Help me move this to the cloud. Help me understand this workload analysis. Help me decide what's the best platform to put this on. But it's that help me. And we've moved out of an era where we're just boxes and wires and plugging network ports up. And so you were talking about application, you know, and sort of where that's headed. I'm hoping that in future, you know, sessions like this, we'll have the ability to talk about things like, what do microservices look like in Azure on Azure Service Fabric? What does containerization look like once Windows Server 2016 comes out and has Docker capabilities in it? What do those things get us, and where does it get us to that next generation of applications? So
yeah, that's right. And you got to think about all sorts of things. How do you, back to that security piece, even intrusion detection, you need a company like Alert Logic, right, Cliff Turner? Best question ever. You got to think about those things. A little plug for the best question ever with Alert Logic. We like those guys. They're good people. Hey, Kent, we're getting to the end of our time here.
This has been fun.
I know. We just get to talk. And
I was going to say we get to do what we would do anyway. We just
we do this every morning over coffee
in front of a staggering audience of 21.
Tens and tens.
Absolutely. Tell your friends. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So closing thoughts, Kent. We've talked about a myriad of things. You know, something profound. What are you going to leave us with?
I'm going to go back to the thing we talked about sort of midstream, which this is not your father's Microsoft. This is not, you know, it's not your daddy's Microsoft. It is a brave new company that is extending itself out into areas that, frankly, I never thought I would see. You know, I was one of the doom and gloomers that thought Microsoft would probably be swept up in the dustbin of history, supplanted by somebody else. And at every single turn, they continue to reinvent themselves, and they continue to bring stuff out that companies like ours can figure out how to put it together, how to package it up for a customer and deliver it. And man, I got to tell you, if the next 5 years are anything like the previous 5 years for Microsoft's concerned, it's going to be a mind blower. Buckle up.
Favorite Azure feature? What is it?
Oh, right now for me, it's Azure Service Fabric. I know we didn't talk about it today, but it is microservice, you know, capability inside Azure. And like I said, we need to talk about that in a future, you know, session.
All right, so let's make that the next one. How do we take these big monolithic applications and turn them into little things, and where does Service Fabric fit into that? There's your point.
How about you? What's your favorite feature?
Ooh. Like media services. It's not too new.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the cool one. So for sure.
Well, it's, you know, and it's tangible. It's finally something that has a, you know, it's not Service Fabric, which sounds really cool, but I also don't understand it too much. I can kind of figure it out. But media services, I can figure that out. I can transcode. I can make it available. I can input one video here and output around the world. There's some pretty cool stuff there. So
I'm waiting for the people who build the Netflix on Azure.
Oh,
I shouldn't have said that. As a loyal Netflix customer, I should be careful about that. So.
Be very careful. That might cause rates to go up if they have to support two platforms. All right, Ken, thank you for taking time out of your very busy day of trying to fix your car problems and hanging out with me today. This has been great. I think we're back in another week or two. Watch for some updates on the Twitters.
And thanks for the guys behind the scenes that have kind of helped put this together too. I mean, without them, you know, we would still be trying to figure out Google Hangouts. So,
right, and whatever a question app is in the Google Pluses.
Right.
Nice. All right, thank you. My name is Jeff DeVerter. That's Kent Kingery. We work for Rackspace, and we want to help solve your problems using Azure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.